Does the government run your home?
My.
The government.
This is a great discussion.
So in 2023, California proposed a bill, and for those of you who would love to look up the bill, it's AB 957, that would require judges to consider whether a parent affirms a child's gender identity when making custody decisions. So while intended to protect transgender youth, it raises concerns among parents who feared they could lose custody for not affirming a gender transition. So even I guess you can say a well-meaning legislation can make parents feel like they're no longer free to guide their children according to their values.
Right.
And it seems like especially values that are faith-based. What's up, guys? Welcome to the Baloney Podcast. We are your hosts, Sean and Lanette Reed, and we just want to say thank you so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day to sit down with us, just have a discussion. Listen, this podcast is all about helping you get rid of the baloney in your life. Back in the day, Sean and I, we were believing a lot of baloney, a lot of lies, and those lies were preventing us from reaching our legacy or living a life of legacy. And so this podcast is all about helping you identify those lies and getting you to a point to where you are living out your legacy today. So even I guess you can say a well-meaning legislation can make parents feel like they're no longer free to guide their children according to their values.
Right.
And it seems like especially values that are faith-based.
100%.
Yes.
And so this is a tough one because we do have this principle as believers, where we are to obey the laws of the land.
Ooh.
Right. Now, the beauty of the United States is, depending on the state you're in,
It's true.
the laws change. So as much as the laws can shift, so can you. And if one state decides that it's going to do something that jeopardizes the quality of life for you, your family, because it jeopardizes your faith and you can leave, the question becomes, is that what God is telling you to do? Because to stay may mean that you have to stay and fight the powers that be. And the question is everybody called for such a fight? There's a lot of change that has happened in California over the years. We know a lot of ministries and, pastors that we're connected with there, and they've seen
They've seen the change.
seen the change. For any parent who has someone who is, LGBTQ and that's their child and they're struggling with this, like, how do I hold to my faith and love my child through, whatever the transitions may be that they're going through, considering their gender and their identity? It is highly sensitive. But I would say there are ways to be able to navigate the tension that exists within your own house. Part of our discussion is, though, how do you deal with that tension that exists outside of your house?
Right.
And so I kind of want to talk about both of those.
Yeah, because the reality is, it's important to know that you're the one that's leading your home, not culture, not society, and not the government.
Yeah.
So, and not even your kids, right? You are the parent. You are the king and or queen of that home, of that domain. So, I guess you can say the buck stops with you in the sense of what do you want your home to feel like, be like, stand for?
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of families have, or people have asked themselves that question.
Of what they value?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you don't ask yourself what I value, then anything that becomes common becomes your kingdom.
So you're talking about what society says is the right way to raise your kids, the right way to believe, the thing you have to affirm, or else you're being borderline. I think right now we have the cry of the LGBT community would be that to refuse to allow whatever they want to identify as to be acceptable from a Christian perspective, it's akin to racism. The civil rights movement, so that's where there's now this merging of blacks needed equality and Jim Crow was unfair and it held people back from being free. And so now there's this mingling of the same notion of race with now gender identification and sexual orientation. And so personally, I believe that they are different.
Absolutely.
I believe it's completely different.
Well, one, okay, so I went back to school to get my
Only reason why I'm going there is because the idea is if you're talking about establishing what your values are, then you have to know why you believe the way you
Yes.
believe.
Yes.
And so I think that what's happening in society and the argument that's happening within society that's forcing some of these laws to the forefront is this idea that just like civil rights, just like slavery, is the same thing as rejecting my choice to choose my gender or to transform my gender.
Yeah. So talking about that choice. So I went back to school, so I'm almost done getting my degree in psychology. And gender is a societal term. So as society goes, so does the definition of gender. Race is a biological term. African American. I was born African American. My DNA screams I'm black, right?
Well, wouldn't DNA say the same thing as far as like what a man is and what a woman is?
Absolutely. So when people are talking about what is your gender versus what is your sex, those are two different things. So I think a lot of people get confused in the effort of debating their perspective. You got to go back to definitions and terms and the origin.
Because if you start with a bad definition, then you're going to keep circling in the same level of bondage. So in order to
Absolutely.
get free, you got to get free from bad definitions.
So what are we talking about? Are we having a healthy debate on gender, or are we having a healthy debate on sex and biology? If we're talking about sex, then it is DNA. You're either a male or a female, and there is a small percentage of humans out there who are born, yes, is a micro percentage, right? So who are born with both, and they can lean either way. It's like you decide. The parent decides, right? But if we're talking about gender, then man, as society goes up and down, so does that definition. So when it comes to courts, like making a law, I think, in my perspective, I think courts need to make a decision based on what is raw facts, concrete.
Which just happened in the UK. So the UK just announced their perspective would be one that says if you're born biologically male, you will be identified as male. Born biologically female, you're identified as female. The US just did the same thing. So there is this coming to terms with this idea of if you go to the doctor and you say that you are they, them, or you don't want to identify as what your sexuality would be based on your birth, a doctor's medical treatment changes.
Correct.
Depending on your actual, what your DNA reads and the quality of care or the way that your body changes, the hormones, the testosterone, all these things can be manipulated. Yet from the beginning, they're embedded in us and we're programmed to work a certain way. So the blood don't lie, right? Genetic coding matters. And so man can play with coding, but God wrote a story for us that sometimes I think, when we think of a biblical perspective, I'm fearfully, wonderfully made. You knit me together in my mother's womb and the hairs on my head are numbered, right? So all of these verses, they're poetry. So this isn't a scientific method of how a baby is formed in the womb when you hear those verses, but it does imply that there's foreknowledge of God and he's a divine designer. So God is part of he's the author and finisher of not just our faith, which is what we believe, but the very first picture we get of God in the book of Genesis, in the beginning, God created. So you see that everything that is created, there was nothing that was made without Jesus being involved, without the Holy Spirit being involved, without the God the Father being involved. Male and female created he them to rule and to dominate within the world. So Creator God, in his creative intent for the world, put in there the sexes and that he would rule through them as they ruled over the earth. So sex is a priority for God.
So the scripture, Joshua 24:15 says, as for me and my house, we're going to serve the Lord.
Yeah.
So I think at some point, a couple or a single parent, or even just a single, has to establish the standard or adopting a way of living in order to leave whatever legacy that they're trying to leave.
I would call it a biblical worldview.
Okay.
And I don't think that this is something that's said quite often in the church.
Okay.
But I think it's something that needs to be explored and understood. A
Well, you can
worldview.
do that here.
Yeah. So a worldview is the lens that I see the world through, basically. So it's what colors the lenses that I look through. So if I put on shades, for instance, sunglasses, they kind of dim the brightness of the sun to where I can see a certain way. And if I just had on, prescription lenses, they affect how I see things. So what we're trying to say is, if I look through biblical definitions and biblical principles, it shifts my worldview. And so there are a lot of people who claim to be believers that have never put on biblical bifocals. So they don't see life according to God's design. And so if we don't explore the biblical bifocals, then we really are saying, I want heaven, but I don't want his rule in me on earth. I want Jesus. I like him, but I want life according to my worldview, or as you're saying from the top of the conversation, from the society's worldview, instead of saying, let me do the hard work of exploring from a biblical perspective what it is that God has to say about our ethnicity, our justice in society, which would say that if a person is transgender, that I still love them.
Absolutely.
And I treat them with the compassion that God would treat them with.
Absolutely.
If he
and
was,
I can still go to dinner with them.
Right.
And if they work at Chili's, they can still take my order.
Right. So I don't ban a person because they're trans or any other sexual orientation that's other than mine.
Sure.
However, this does come up to a place of, if I had a relative who was trans and they were getting married to somebody and they wanted to invite me to the wedding, the question may be, do I go to support that type of union?
That is a great question, because we get that a lot.
And for me, the answer is a hard no.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to love you.
Yeah.
But I don't have to necessarily agree with everything you do. Case in point, it may be festive and celebratory to you, but to me, it's destructive to yourself and your spirituality. I will not participate in that. And someone would say, well, that's their choice. You're coming against their choice. You're taking away their freedom. Every choice that a person makes, even though they're free to choose it, it doesn't mean that that choice is a healthy one. So I don't have to advocate for your choice that's detrimental to yourself or to society. And so if my biblical worldview is drug addiction is bad, but you say God made plants and we should be able to just kind of, if I want to do crack, that's my prerogative. I'm still going to heaven. Don't expect for me to show up when you fire it up the next time. That's an unhealthy choice. And my worldview is that's something that's going to destroy you or other people around you. Yeah. I'm not going to be a part of secondhand smoke.
So what you're saying,
I just said something right there.
What you're saying takes a lot of work, because you're challenging people to put in the work to figure out, what does God say about ...
Correct.
And then taking the time necessary to say, well, how does that differ from a societal standpoint? And then taking the further step to say, okay, well, do I agree with God or do I agree with society? And if it clashes, like if I disagree with what God is saying, am I going to submit to him whether I feel like it or not? Like, that is a clash.
And to your point, that's where, let's say in the past, if the laws of the land are unjust laws, if the laws of the land are unjust laws and it's clashing with truth that is a biblical worldview, I fight against that power.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that were not the case, and this is where some people are just like, when injustice happens, stay out of it, just let it be what it is. That's not a biblical worldview at all. A biblical worldview is you take care of the poor, the widow, the orphan. So if you see human trafficking, we, the church, step in to be a part of the solution.
We are the standard. Not we are the standard. We maintain the standard.
We maintain the standard that God has set, and we fight for that standard. So if I see injustice, human trafficking, if I see a trans or gay person that's being unfairly treated in the sense of somebody physically abusing them, verbally attacking them, we don't need to use slurs. We don't need to, humiliate or mock those that don't believe the same way that we do. That's completely not Christ-like. So there is a checking of our hearts as we also have healthy dialogue with those who believe differently. There's also another thought process here when you talk about the standard and we being ones who preserve it. When Jesus said that you are the salt of the earth and the light of the world, light illuminates, but it doesn't force someone to see the same way. We can shine light to where they have the choice to see it differently, but I'm never taking away someone's will to force them to bend to mine. And so I illuminate. A person can choose to close their eyes, and I have to be okay with them closing their eyes and stumbling in darkness, even if it means they miss God. And so I'm not superior in that. I'm a facilitator of light. And then secondly, salt, it preserves meat. When he says you're the salt of the earth, it means you're a preservative in a decaying society. And if we begin to embrace the reality that the world is dying, the flesh dies daily, the world is dying daily, the further society drifts from the word of God, the more the world will fall apart. Because by his word, all things come into existence, and by his word, all things are held together, scripture says. So the further away from his word we are, the more society drifts into chaos.
We should not be surprised by that.
At all.
So we shouldn't be surprised when people turn to sin, or when people gravitate to sin, or when people do something that is just unheard of. And so it should grieve our heart, but it should grieve our heart to be more loving and not more judgmental.
Yes, because the purpose of salt in meat is to preserve it, not necessarily to convert it. Salt doesn't make meat something else. It just preserves it. So when we're called to be salt on the earth, the idea behind that is we are helping it be kept. Some people believe in dispensations, and the idea of dispensations are there are time periods where God is doing different work. So you had the creation, you had the law, dispensation of the law, and then you have the dispensation of grace, for instance. Grace is now where we are, the dispensation where the church is in the earth. And if we believe that Jesus is going to return, one day make all things new, then we're kind of in that in-between spot. If you believe in the tribulation period, or this coming judgment that's going to happen to the world, then the idea is the church has been snatched out. So there's no more salt. So the earth decays at a more rapid rate, and then comes the impending doom and more calamity and more crisis. So the idea is that the church, this is a dispensation of grace. And some people in the church world, to the detriment of the identity of the biblical worldview. Some people in the church world have taken their role to be one to force people to change because they don't like it's almost like anyone else who doesn't agree with us is like subhuman.
Yeah, it's threatening to them.
So it's like there's harshness, it's cold because someone hasn't been converted. So the idea of God is that you can be at a party with people who don't think like you, aren't as mature as you, don't have a biblical worldview as you, and you should be able to be liked. Now, if you have a discussion and they ask you your perspective and all of a sudden they disagree and they walk away, it's okay. You don't have to like me. But the idea is I'm gonna love you either way.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that I would say shout out to our middle child, Brianna, who has navigated her industry so well. So she lives in New York. She's a theater person. And of course, a lot of people in that industry are part of the LGBTQ plus community. And she has learned, and she does it so well, to embrace them, love them, respect them. And they have learned to embrace her, love her, and respect her perspectives as well. And so in all of her friendships, and we know a lot of her friends, and they love it when we come to town, mostly because Sean cooks some food. But then they also gather and they have conversations with us, knowing that we're preachers and knowing we know about their walk and their challenges.
And to me, I don't need the world to agree with my standard for me to know that they are only acting out of brokenness because they don't have the light.
And what we do, because we didn't allow society or government or what social media says about our home, we've kind of created our own values. We just love the heck out of them. And we allow that love we extend that love to them. We welcome them into our home, and we allow that to minister to them.
Yeah. And if the opportunity comes up for the gospel, here's the difference between what I think we have right now with Christian nationalism, which I do not affirm. But the idea behind Christian nationalism, if you were to grab some of these people, put a microphone to their mouth, and you ask them why abortion is wrong, if you ask them about these kind of Republican ideology, if you ask them about the origin of why they agree with it, they really can't answer the question. It's just the rhetoric is, the same. It's the same rhetoric. And so my thing is, it's not that I'm, for abortion or any of that. And that's another episode. Right. But the idea behind it is, can I at least give the why behind my reasoning?
And most of them can't.
And most of them can't.
It's just because. Yeah. It's just not right.
And so everybody who's got an abortion, they see him as a baby killer. And so that implies that they just running around, just murdering. And so it's like, there's so much more nuance to people's stories. There's so much more nuance to people's lives. And sin is sin. But the irony is, all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So why does one sin imply that we should be away with these people and punish these people in a way that doesn't merit the same? Because if I'm guilty of one sin, the Bible says that I'm guilty of them all.
I want to go back to what you said. Everybody has a story. Everybody has a painful moment that they may be reliving every single day. And the behavior that they're presenting or the decisions that they're making is simply an echo of that pain.
Right.
And then here you come, a person who is supposed to be a soldier of love and openness and grace, but all I get from you is judgment and condemnation. It drives them further into their pain.
What I want to make clear, though, is there's a difference between, so like I totally agree with what you just said. I'm saying in addition to that, there's a difference between what some might call judging them and me having a difference of opinion and truth towards them. I think the problem is when it's all truth and no love, then the message is cutting. And it's not healthy. I think that when you're full of grace and truth, that's when you have what we would call a holy love. God is love, 100%, but love defined by himself, not love defined by what society says love is. Love, according to the LGBTQ plus community, would be love is love. So that means do what you want, enjoy whomever you want to enjoy. There's no restriction on that. So then if you take that definition and you try to limit who God is to your perspective of what love is. No, man, love is a holy love. Love is a love that's rooted in justice and righteousness and truth. God's throne is seated in righteousness. So there is a balance of, yes, there's unconditional, I will do right by you because you're my choice. That's love. Not, I will tolerate whatever the heck you want to do because you think it's right. And therefore, God has to bend his knee to what you determine as righteousness. Hey, everybody, real quick, we got some good news. Every month, we're going to do legacy challenges. And these challenges will help your family build generational blessing instead of generational brokenness. If you want to be equipped with these free resources. So here's what we want you to do. Click the link in our show notes or in the video description. And we want to make sure that we are able to get to your inbox the resources that will help just build your family, build your future, and take your life to the next level with some challenge.
Going back to it, if we're talking about, establishing the standard for our home and not allowing outside influence to come in and tell me what I'm supposed to do as a wife, as a parent, as a business owner, whatever. What are some ways that I have a couple of them, but I would love to hear from you. But what are some ways that I can do that?
I think it starts first and foremost. You have to know what you believe and why you believe it. In the book of Peter, 1 Peter tells us to sanctify the Lord in our hearts as holy. And always be ready to give a defense for the hope that you have. To me, those two, they go hand in hand. And if I sanctify the Lord in my heart as holy, then that is me adopting a biblical worldview. And he is Lord and I am not. And I take up my cross, and that includes my house. If you under my roof until you grown, you go abide by what I say as the parent. Yep. And the moment that the government decide that they want to come in and strip away my rights as a parent, to teach what I believe, to lead them and guide them.
Let me tell you something. I birthed.
You hear me?
Those three humans.
You hear me? And so for somebody to come in and say, I'm going to tell you, now abuse is a different thing.
Sure.
But when you're changing the definition of what abuse is, if abuse means that me telling my child who is confused on whether they're a boy or a girl.
Yeah.
And I'm saying, look at your penis.
Yeah.
That means you're a boy. Look at your vagina.
Let's
that
pull
means
out your
you're a
birth
girl.
certificate.
In a minute, you about to have your period and breasts are going to grow. You are going to have hormonal changes.
Right.
And son, you're going to have to strengthen yourself because you got to put your hands to work. And you are to provide and take care of your family. Ain't no stay-at-home dad in you. You're going to be one that's going to go out and work, because from a biblical point of view, if a man don't work, a man don't eat. I am instilling these values.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be unhealthy to say.
And it shouldn't be threatening.
It shouldn't be. When they go to the doctor or if they go to the bathroom, I want them to have the safety of knowing that this is okay. And it's okay for me to go in the one with the little stick figured man and the one with the little skirt, that represents the little woman. And so we can go in these different places and feel safe in these rooms, because there are differences in our bodies. I was watching basketball legend Cheryl Miller. She was legendary in the WNBA and, her career in college and everything. And she was doing a podcast, and they were asking her, do you ever think that there would be a woman who would be able to play in the NBA, a crossover player? And she said, absolutely not. And she's one of the most dominant players ever. And she said, just as much as women are accelerating and increasing in their capabilities and their strength, and they're doing things that they've never seen before, she said men aren't declining either.
Why do we have a problem honoring
Exactly.
one another?
There's a difference in strength, and that should be okay. But again, if the idea behind my definition of gender is one that says that one gender is subhuman to the other. Yeah. And if society has implied that being feminine is being weak or less than, that's the problem. So if you start changing voter laws that imply that a woman's vote by herself with her own ID with a husband, if her vote has to be tied to him and what his views are and whatever else they want to change, all of a sudden you're implying something about women. We've been through the suffrage movement. We've been through all of this stuff before. And so it's just weird that we're still circling around the same mountains, which implies that must be what Christians believe, that women are in some way subservient because they can't vote for themselves.
I can provide on my own.
You see what I'm saying?
I have to. Sister will thrive.
But to the point, you are thriving now. And so to that point, I think that this is where there has been a stigma and a shame around femininity, so much so that it has birthed something that says, I have to be strengthened, fortified, determine my own path. And then some of that determination, it leads to this idea that soft is inhuman, that to be as you were born is not enough. And that is waving your fist in the face of your creator and saying, God, you made a mistake when you made me. Let me correct where you went wrong, heavenly God.
Good. That's good. Well, I've got 2 practical ways that you could just kind of establish what is our family, what do we stand for? And one is family value check-ins. So being able to sit down with your spouse, with your kids. If you're single, being able to sit down with friends, or single with a kid, being able to sit down with a kid and actually discuss and ask yourselves, what are we building? Like, what do we want our family to stand for? What is right in God's eyes that's not right in our eyes right now? And face those challenges head on, right? And if it takes adjusting, then you do what you got to do to adjust. But I think being intentional about having those conversations, and as you do that, other people will see the light that you mentioned coming out of your home, or being able to recognize, like, we are salt, and every time somebody walks through our door, they gonna taste that salt.
Right.
And the other thing is, it's just a phrase that I have here, is what we tolerate becomes our culture, and what we intentionally build becomes our legacy. And so if we take our hands off of it, if we're passive, if we don't say anything about the injustice,
Right,
then people will assume that we are for the injustice.
yeah, your silence becomes an implication that you're complicit.
Now, I'm not saying you got to get out there and protest like a large group of people do. I'm not saying that you have to post signs in your yard or have a bumper sticker.
Every Instagram or Facebook or a TikTok
you don't have
post.
To do any of that.
Right.
But you can lend a prayer. You can give a prayer to those groups of people who are marginalized. Or if a discussion during a work break is going on, you can share a little bit of your perspective.
Yeah, and what I would say is, I mean, obviously you need to vote. as well.
Absolutely.
You need to vote not just your conscience. You need to vote
Yes.
a biblical worldview. So I also think that the way that you determine for your home what are going to be the rules, make them clearly laid out for your family. I think this is why you should wake your family up and take them to church and worship with you. I think you need to make sure that the church you attend is one that also preaches a biblical worldview. And that means you're going to have to spend a little bit more time like studying and exploring, sound theology, sound Christology. I think my last thought on it would be also that if worse come to worse, and it's one of these moments where, in some countries, they're making it to where if you preach against same-sex marriage, then you can go to prison as a preacher. I would leave that country. And I know that just kind of sounds like...
But that may not be your jam.
Right.
Right.
Now, if you have the freedom to do that, some people are in places where you have to believe under the persecution. Sure. And so that was the early church. I mean, at the end of the day, the early church was in a society that was against them. And they had to make a choice to say, we will be persecuted because of our righteousness. And this is where the chapters you should read for this to strengthen you during a very polarizing time in society, you need to read 1 Peter. And 1 Peter is written to believers who are suffering. They're under persecution. They're going through extreme conditions for their faith. Society is against them. People are being mutilated. They're being ostracized. They're having church inside of caves. They're dealing with catacombs. They're dealing with extreme persecution. And Peter is telling them, Jesus told you were going to suffer.
Yeah.
Jesus told you were going to be persecuted. But if you're going to be persecuted, and this is what's so important about what Peter is saying, be persecuted for righteousness' sake. Yeah. Meaning, let it not be just because you pitched your tent with extreme right-wing Tea Party, ideology. Yeah. Don't let it be because you mistook Christian nationalism for a biblical worldview. Make sure that if you're suffering for righteousness' sake, it's not because you're a jerk of a human being, because you think that being ugly and loud and being accusatory and being condemning and shaming people and ostracizing them and beating them up makes you a good Christian. Yeah. You're not doing your Christian duty by imitating some of the worst of what we've seen in humanity with these politicians, these news anchors, and the rest of these people. You can watch it, but don't mimic it. Because I promise you, Jesus is not a Republican nor a Democrat. He's not liberal. He's above it all. He's not trying to be your president. That's it. And Jesus don't need any human being to be his president. He's not God's man. I promise you that. Jesus is Lord, and he is the man that we need. He's the God man.
That's right.
Emmanuel, Christ.
Right.
With
and
us,
I did a devotion, my last. There is no Jesus and.
100%.
There is no I'm a believer and. I'm a believer.
I'm a believer.
I'm not a believer and a Democrat.
And again, that's the whole point of this conversation. Yeah. The problem is
we have a lot of ands coming into our front door.
Oh man, Jesus is Lord. I'm his child. Yeah. That settles it.
Okay. Thank you all for watching. Subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, and subscribe to our email list, SeanandLanette.com, and we'll see you on the next episode.